Good morning. So over the past couple of days, I've had a bunch of people, I've mentioned this panel, and they said, what do you think about universal basic income? I had to say, I'm an American, so in my country there's a lot of people who aren't quite sure we should necessarily stop people from dying in the street from poor health care. So I don't know, and so I'm glad we have a bunch of people who can help set me straight. So for the benefit of maybe other Yanks in the audience, let's define universal basic income. How is this different from welfare as we know it? And you all can take that in whatever order you prefer.
Guy?
Yes. That's good morning, everybody. Thanks for turning up. And a basic income is a regular amount paid to everybody. The everybody has to be defined as an amount of cash that would be paid each month as a right. It would be a modest amount that could pay for basic needs. It would be unconditional. That's the critical part. Unconditional in terms of your income and unconditional in terms of requiring you to do particular things, which is quite unlike conventional means-tested social assistance, for example. And it would be paid individually. So each man and each woman would receive the basic income, and usually a smaller amount would be paid to each child. The eligibility would be defined as a usual legal resident, and in some schemes, a citizen who is usually resident in the community. These are definitional aspects that have to be decided pragmatically.
Yeah, I'll just add two things, which is welfare usually has two dimensions now. You either get something for doing something. So if you look for a job, we'll give you some money, or we restrict what you get. So we give you a voucher that you can buy food, or we say you can only do this with the voucher. Basic income says, here's money, do whatever you want with it, and we're not going to link it to getting a job or doing something else. We're just going to give it to you. And it really is a bit of a rethink of the way we've thought about welfare, which is the question of whether we can trust the poor or recipients. So the evidence suggests that we can. People tend to spend money well. They know their needs better than the government often knows their needs. And yet I think kind of underlying a lot of the modern welfare system is this belief that we cannot trust the poor.
If I may. Well, this idea is a very interesting one, and the tests that, for instance, are occurring right now in Finland, we have to examine carefully their results. But from a government point of view, there are three critical questions to address. First is, of course, the question of the cost involved in generalizing minimum universal income. The second, more important than the first, is the social acceptance of this measure, because it obliged to rethink radically the way we conceived the welfare state in the post-war. And thirdly is the need to couple the income that as a citizen you are entitled to receive and your integration in society and your integration in the labor market and your feeling that there is a state to which you belong. So if you could consider these questions from a very political, governmental point of view, it would, I think, help a lot this discussion.
So I think you had sort of mentioned this briefly. This is a question that comes up a lot. Why is this better than investing in public services like transit and health insurance, although Lord knows that's an issue in the States as well. Why would you not want to invest in that first, and then maybe once you've got everyone taken care of at the margins of society, we can advance to that?
Yes. So I think that's a false dichotomy. We should be doing both. I don't think anybody on this stage thinks that we should replace national security, roads, investment in health with cash transfers. I certainly don't. I think what a lot of us do think is there is a broad provision of stuff to people. And I'll use the example of India, where their second largest social welfare program gives people vouchers. And the voucher lets them go to the corner store and get food, so they can trade their voucher for food. Now, the interesting thing is they've recently experimented and started letting people sell these vouchers for food for cash. And what it turns out is that people will sell their dollar voucher for 50 cents. Over 80% of people will sell it at a discount. Now, the government saves money, the recipients prefer it, and this is more popular politically. That's the trade-off, not the question of public health or roads.
I agree. I think that what people will have been misunderstood in the Finnish experiment is that it's an experiment. We want the information about the basic income, this kind of mechanism, whether it's called basic income or something else. We want to see if this kind of mechanism increases the incentive to take on work. So we don't know the results yet, but I agree. There are, you cannot say that there is only one solution with every problem. You have to invest in schools, education, public services, everything, and take a wide range of actions from the government side then to help people. Not unconditional money is not best way to go with everybody. So for some people, it might be bad.
So I guess, yes.
I've been working on basic income for more than 30 years. And I've been involved in doing a number of pilots in developing countries and elsewhere, advising. And the great thing about a basic income is, first of all, it is a matter of social justice. It's distributing in a way that gives everybody basic security from the collective wealth of our societies. It's quite different from other forms of distribution policy. It's an egalitarian measure, but it enhances freedom. And the importance of a basic income, as we've done with our pilots in India, I used to go out to the villages where we were providing every man, every woman, every child with a basic income. And I said, why are the effects so much greater than the amount of money that we were giving? And I worked it out. The emancipatory value of a basic income is greater than the money value. Yeah. So I'm an economist, yes. And that's unlike any other social policy. It enhances your freedom to make choices, your individual needs, your child's individual needs. I can't, as a government bureaucrat, know. But it also removes poverty trap problems. In a country like Portugal or United States, a poverty trap arises from means-tested benefits that are operated in this so-called welfare state, where people going from benefits into the sort of low-wage jobs that the precariat can get these days are facing, in effect, a marginal tax of 80% or more, because they lose the benefits as they get the low-wage jobs. So there is no incentive to take those low-wage jobs. Yeah. In the countries, developing countries, you have to face the reality that any voucher scheme, any means-tested scheme, any behavior scheme only reaches about 30% of the people it's intended to reach, because bureaucrats take the money, corruption, inefficiency, all of the bureaucracy that it never reaches. In India, they reckon that 90% of every rupee spent on these other forms of social welfare never reaches the poor. 90%. Whereas when we did our pilots, 100% reached the intended recipients. So there are many advantages if you want to reduce poverty, reduce inequality, and enhance people's freedom. And I think these are very important aspects of a basic income. And I've summarized them in a book summarizing 30 years of research.
Yes.
I agree with Guy. I think that there is one great thing that we have been seeing in this Finnish experiment, and that is that this a certain amount of money that you can be sure of comes every month at the same time, and you can, free your mind to, have the energy to look for a job. That's a great thing because in our unemployment benefit scheme there is lots of incentive traps. It's not worthwhile for you to take on a job because you might end up with less money when you take on a part-time job than when you would be on fully unemployment benefits. So that's a problem. But the bureaucracy, that's the other side, and that's a really as a bureaucrat myself, I think that we have to tackle that problem.
But in terms of my second question, the social acceptance, the social support to such a big change, the problem is with the idea of unconditionality. That's the idea, because this is a counterintuitive idea. So it's harder to people to understand it. Because, for instance, if you live in a country of the European Union, you can always apply to a minimum income that is guaranteed by the state. And the two only obligations that you have is, first, if you have children must attend the school. And second, you have to register yourself in an employment public service. And if there is an offer of work that is compatible with your qualifications, you have to accept it. So, for instance, in Portugal, during the last 2 decades, this idea was rooted, and people right now accept very well the existence of this minimum income guaranteed by the state with these two conditions. So the problem, for instance, for me as a social democrat, and I'm a politician, so I need social support to my ideas. The problem is to convince people that giving up these two conditions make the scheme work better.
So this sort of tiptoes up to my next question, and this is not so much of one of equity, I guess, but of how you sell the idea. In any universal basic income system, you're eventually going to have some rich jerk who inherited $14 million from his parents. Let's call this person hypothetically Ronald Trump, who is suddenly spending my tax dollars and obviously doesn't need it, doesn't deserve it. How do you get people to look past that?
That's one of the easiest aspects of this scheme. Instead of thinking you're going to give to the poor through means testing, which involves a whole lot of administrative, expensive processes, and we know from hundreds of research studies that that scheme does not reach a large proportion of those it's intended to reach. The Social Democrats preach this stuff, but meanwhile, only 50% of those they claim should be getting get it. But it's much easier if you give everybody a basic income and then tax back from the wealthy. Mm-hmm. So you basically would alter the tax rate to claw back from the wealthy. It's administratively much easier. It doesn't involve stigma, whereas means testing involves stigma. You have to apply, you have to go, you have to plead, you have to smile, you have to be obsequious to a bureaucrat, and you may or may not get something. Have you looked for work? Have you looked for a job? Whose slippers are under your bed? Is it a lover who's supporting you? Intrusive stuff with the means testing system. This way you say, you are a citizen, you are a legal resident, we want to give you a chance to make something out of your life. And one of the problems on the left has been they don't trust people. You must trust people. Provide freedom. That's why the Social Democrats are losing in most parts of the world, because they don't recognize that in this new flexible open system with a growing precariat facing insecurity, their old systems don't reach people. So they're leaving growing numbers of people homeless, in debt, lacking any sort of system role in society, and facing declining real wages. If we want that to continue, we're going to get more Donald Trumps, and we're going to get more
Ronald Trump,
social,
totally different guy.
social discord. So I think the old system is getting worse and worse because of our flexible, open society with more and more people in the precariat.
That's true. Yeah. In Finland, the benefit system is very complex. We have over 40 benefits that we implement in the basic social security field. And so it's, you know, it's past due. We have to renew it anyways, whether this basic income is going to take place or not. But we are also talking in Finland about participation and the responsibility of human beings, of their lives and their, you know, income. So we are trying next year, in the beginning of next year, we are trying a new experiment about this participation benefit.
And I think the stigma point is such a critical point. So GiveDirectly lets the public give directly to people in various parts of the world. So just 2 stories on stigma recently. I was just in Kenya, where we're doing a basic income over 12 years for people. And I went to some of the poorest households in the village and said, how do you feel that your neighbor, who has a nicer house, more money, is getting the exact same amount of money as you? Like, surely you must be upset about that. And they said, no. Before, he was wealthy and I was poor. And wealthy is about $1 a day. For context, poor is about 50 cents a day that people are living on. So it's a different level of wealth. He said, now we're all just getting $22 a month. And I can talk to him or her like a peer. And it's completely level set the village. The second story, we just did some work in Houston after the hurricane and needed to pick who we were going to serve. So we went into a community and thought this is going to be great. In the U.S., we have income data. We know who's on welfare. We know who's on food stamps. We'll just give it to the poorest people on food stamps. And the community rejected it. And they said, this is so stigmatized. We don't want people on food stamps getting more. Even the people on food stamps didn't want the money. I said, what do you want? They said, why don't you just run a lottery? We'll just pick a ball out of a hat and give to that person. And as you raise more money, we'll give to more people. So people really do feel the stigma of social programs. And the idea that we're just going to give an equal amount to everyone, I think is quite powerful.
Of course, I disagree. Because what you call stigma, I call it citizenship and social integration. Yes? And the very force of social security and education and public services in health, as they were structured in Europe in the post-war, is the idea of integrating people, of citizens, of participants, in a wider community that we call the welfare state. And the idea that it is only sufficient to give some money because all the people are potentially entrepreneurs. All the people are struggling for themselves. I think this is a right-wing view that can undermine the fundament of the consensus between Christian Democrats and Social Democrats that built Europe as we know it. Of course, I recognize that this is a very valuable idea that deserves to be tested, to be experimented, and to see the results. But this is not the revolution. This is not the new idea that buries all the evolution that we have seen progressively and gradually implemented in Europe. You can use always also microcredit programs to help people to develop their competences in creating their own jobs, and the Bangladesh experiment is worthwhile to be seen and to be assessed. But you know, if I present as an alternative to the social structure that it exists right now, if I present as an alternative the idea that now we are launching this new idea of giving money to people with no conditions at all, I fear very much that the decline of social democrats will be accompanied by the decline of liberals, by the decline of the Christian Democrats, and by the rise of the extreme wing parties in the next elections. So we have to consider also not only the theoretical power of our ideas, but also the political and social conditions to launch it.
I
That's
agree,
my point.
and I don't think we're probably that far apart. And I think the media presents it as the robots are coming and universal
That's
basic
my next
income is
question.
crazy and there's
Okay,
a
Adam.
revolution. If you just call this Social Security with a younger age cutoff, it sounds a whole lot less revolutionary. Social Security is an unconditional cash transfer.
So, yeah, the context for this, and this is where I guess people look a little suspiciously when it's people like Elon Musk saying we should have this. You know, there's a lot of automation. People focus a lot on, oh, it's workers in other countries taking our jobs. No, it's the machines taking our jobs everywhere. So to what extent is, you know, there's this thinking that, oh, this is big tech trying to sort of declining responsibility for the problem it's creating because it's making machines so efficient that people can't compete. And it almost sounds like it ends up we're going to have to tax the robots. Do we tax the robots? Where does the money come from equitably in a system like this? And how does this let us deal with automation making certain jobs, I guess, unviable for human labor?
I think you've got several questions rolled up in one there. I think I've been arguing long before the tech people have suddenly come on board. I welcome them coming on board because it's broadening the number of people supporting it. My own view for a basic income is that our income distribution system of the 20th century has broken down. All over the OECD countries, real wages have been declining for the last 30 years. 30 years. Our income inequality has been growing dramatically, and the old welfare system has failed. It's no longer appropriate. It was very progressive in the middle decades of the 20th century. I profoundly disagree with linking income security, basic income security, with labor. Okay? It means that a lot of people who are doing a lot of work, they won't get entitled to income support. Women who do care work, voluntary work, that's not linked to getting income security. They're doing work. It should be called work. Our statistics are unfit for purpose. And in this more flexible, open economy, more people are doing more forms of work that are not counted as labor. But I do believe that the robots and automation are very disruptive. And what they're doing is accentuating the economic insecurity of millions and millions of people. And the psychologists have taught us that people who have more insecurity, their mental bandwidth shrinks, their IQ shrinks, and their ability to take strategic long-term decisions shrinks, and their sense of citizenship and altruism shrink. And if you give people basic security, the opposite happens. You should study the pilots that have been done in industrialized countries. I just want to mention one. It was done in North Carolina. It was done by chance when a longitudinal study was undertaken over 20 years of child development, when a basic income was distributed to one large community. It was found at the end that children, by the time they were 16, 17, who had been in families receiving the basic income, were 1 year ahead in school than those who had not received the basic income. And in that sense, the data showed that it was because the families that were receiving the basic income had a greater sense of security and calm, and it helped the relationships in the families. This was a basic income that was strengthening citizenship. The same we found in India. We gave the basic income, and that led to more work, not less, and more cooperative development, where cooperatives were set up informally with people putting a bit of basic income and actually productivity going up. It induces people, as Michael was saying, to feel that they belong to a community of equal citizens. And that, I think, is one of the great virtues of a basic income.
North Carolina, that's amazing, because there are a lot of people in that state government who aren't sure the poor should actually vote, much less get a steady income. So how do you define how much a basic income should be? Is it some formula that adjusts every year based on the cost of living or inflation or average income?
Well, if I may say, the Finnish experiment of basic income, it means that every 2,000 people who are getting the basic income get 560 euros per month. Well, that's not much money, you know, you cannot survive with the housing costs and everything in Finland, but they get, the idea is that we replace the basic unemployment benefit amount with that basic income, and if you are entitled to more, so you get more when you apply for it and have the bureaucracy there applying unemployment benefits, but the basic income is coming to you no matter what you do. So we came up with the amount by, you know, seeing the amount of the basic unemployment benefit, because this Finnish experiment is a partial basic income experiment.
I think it's one of the hardest questions, and it depends on local conditions, fiscal situation. But the one thing that I think is inarguable is when you talk about basic income in developed countries, you're talking about a few hundred euros a month. A lot of people will say 1,000 euros a month. In Kenya, the food poverty line is 75 cents a day, which is what we've defined the basic income at. So $22 a month. It's about 1/50th the cost of a basic income in a wealthier country. And I think that's just a provocative question about where to spend kind of at least the philanthropic or aid dollars.
The point is not the amount. The point is the unconditionality.
Yes.
Because, for instance, in a system like the Portuguese, you do have a minimum income guaranteed by state, be it because you earn salaries, wages, or you have an unemployment subsidy, or you have the minimum income guaranteed. The point is that you are obliged to at least two conditions. And all the question goes around the idea that are we ready to convince our people and our electorate that this conditionality is not an advantage but a mistake, an error? This is the point from the, let's say, a political philosophy point of view. Of course, there are very good pilots with results, but there are very good pilots also for programs like the microcredit with excellent results, for instance, in Bangladesh or India, as we know it. And, for instance, in Portugal, we have surveys that show that the experience now institutionalized of a basic minimum income with these two conditions that I referred to is producing good results in terms of social integration of people and access to the labor market. So the point, the difficulty from my point of view, recognizing how interesting is this idea, is the counterintuitive element of unconditionality. Okay? Just to clarify.
I think this is a problem that the Social Democrats have to resolve in their head.
Don't be
because
all of us.
Because it's not. You must therefore oppose all inherited wealth, because that's unconditional. A rich person hands down to his children his wealth unconditionally. So I want the Social Democrats
You have to pay a tax.
that they should abolish all inherited wealth. At least that would be consistent with logic. Okay, I hope so. But unconditionality is actually an overused word. It is conditional on obeying the law. It is conditional on being a legal citizen and a legal resident. It is conditional on being a citizen. It's the other way round. We must realize that progressive social policy in the 21st century must trust people more. At the moment, all the schemes in every country that I know, developed and developing, means-tested minimum income schemes do not reach a very large percentage of the people they claim to reach. They don't reach them. The take-up rates are very low. The take-up rates even in Finland are low, a country with a very sophisticated system of administration. In the United States, in my own country. So with means testing, we are seeing rising homelessness, rising poverty rates, rising inequality, all linked to the conditionality. It makes no sense. It's going nowhere. We need to realize that we are in a crisis point where millions of our citizens are chronically insecure, on the edge of unsustainable debt. One mistake, one illness, bong.
Yes.
And basic income would at least give them an anchor in society. And I wish the left would realize that that should be our function in life, to improve people's security and to reduce inequality. A basic income is a viable way forward.
All right, you get the last word. I can unconditionally say that this panel has enlightened me to some issues, some angles of this issue I hadn't thought about before. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for showing up, as tired and hungover as you may be. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.